Christian greetings to you all in the matchless name of Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I am happy and delighted to share from the Word of God. And for short time meditation, I would like to take your attention towards Exodus chapter 33, words 14 and 15. My presence will go with you and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go, do not carry us up from here. So, standing on this passage, I would like to talk about a topic called mantra of success. The mantra of success is simply the presence of God. If you go through the passages starting from chapter 31 onwards in Exodus, you will see that God's own people who were on a journey to the promised land, when they arrived at Sinai, they started demanding for making gods of their own, and they approached Aaron, and using golds that they had, they created gods for themselves who could lead them into the land of Canaan or the promised land. And as a result, we know that they made a golden calf and they started worshipping that calf. And the anger of the Lord kindled against them. And he said to Moses that I will never travel with the stiff-necked people. And instead, God gave Moses two sureties. He said, one, instead of me, an angel of God will accompany you in your journey to the promised land. And second assurity was, he will, or the angel of the Lord, will lead you to the promised land. He will drive out all the enemies, whoever comes in front of you, and he will take you to the promised land. But if you read chapter 33, Moses was never happy with what God told him. Moses was not satisfied with all these sureties of an angel accompanying him and the promise of taking them safely to the promised land. If I was in the position of Moses, I would have been happy because on one side the promise of God is going to be fulfilled. Whatever may be, the angel will drive out all the enemies and take me to the land that God has promised. But when we look at the life of Moses, Moses was not ready to go with an angel. He was not satisfied with the surety that God gave them about the journey to the promised land. It was not a mere presence of the angel of God that Moses was expecting. Instead, it was the very presence of God that Moses wanted to accompany with him. He said, if your presence is not going to come with me, please do not carry us from this place. It is not the angel of God that he wanted to be accompanying him. It is not the promises of God that he was looking forward. It is God himself, or God himself he was looking forward. And he wanted to find the favor in the sight of God. He wanted to see the face of God. He wanted to experience the glory of God. This was the wish of Moses. Other than that, nothing was satisfying Moses. He was not satisfied with the presence of an angel. He was not satisfied with the promise being fulfilled without the presence of God accompanying him. If you ask Moses, why you are not satisfied? Even after getting all these promises from God, why are you not satisfied? Why are you so adamant that the presence of God should travel with you? Moses would probably tell you an answer. 40 years ago, when I was a young man back in Egypt, I tried everything possible by myself to succeed. And every time I tried to succeed, I failed. My status as the son of Pharaoh's daughter could not save me. The beauty and the strength of my youth and teenage could not help me out. My friend and my community did not stay with me. I failed, and I failed in all the attempts I made. And at last, I ran out from the place, from Egypt, to save my life. Next 40 years of journey in the wilderness as a shepherd, I realized, or that experience taught me, that I was nothing more than a zero. But on a fine morning, as in the midst of my failures, a sight that I saw in the burning bush, A sight that I saw at Mount Horeb changed my life. The presence of God that I met in the bush, the presence of God that told me, I will be with you, changed the entire trajectory of my life. I was old enough, full of weaknesses and limitations to be a leader. But the presence of God took me back to the same Egypt where in the past I have experienced failure. The place from where I ran away for my life. The presence of God took me back to the same place. And it is that presence of God that has led me from Mount Horeb to Mount Sinai, where I stand today. When I'm standing at the Mount Sinai, only one thing I am sure about, only one thing I am looking forward, because I know that it is the presence of God that has took me to this place. And I am assured, or I'm sure about one thing, that without His presence, I cannot do anything. Journey to the promised land without the presence of God accompanying will never be a successful task. Moses knew that he cannot do anything apart. He can be never productive. He can never succeed in his life without the presence of God accompanying him. So the mantra of the life, success, or the mantra of success in the life that Moses learned was the presence of God that accompanies him throughout his life journey. Without the presence of God accompanying him, he will never succeed in his life. This is what Moses learned from his life. And there was another man in the same community who realized the success, the mantra of success that Moses had. And Exodus chapter 33 talks about him. He was Joshua, the son of Nun. And the text says that when the God used to come to the tent of meeting, where Moses would meet God face to face and talk, all the Israel would stand outside the tent of meeting. And Moses would talk to God face to face. And after that, when Moses departs from the tent, Joshua never departs from the tent. He used to stay inside the tent. Even when the entire Israelite community leaves the place, Bible says Joshua used to stay back in the tent of meeting, looking forward to experience the presence of God. Joshua was a man who realized this mantra of success. He, from the life of Moses, learned that until and unless the presence of God accompanies somebody, you can never succeed in the life. And when we turn to the life of Joshua and when we look, exactly the same thing what happened with Moses happened with Joshua also. When Joshua was coming up to the position of a leader, the first promise that God made to Joshua is written in Joshua chapter 1 verse 5. He said, when he was on the leadership position, God told him, just as I was with Moses, just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you also. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you also. Joshua learned the secret from Moses, that until and unless the presence of God accompanies him, one can never succeed in the life. So the first mantra of success in life is the presence of God that accompanies a Christian, a child of God in all his life. Without this presence of God accompanying, we can never succeed in our life. The second incident which I would like to bring into your notice is from 1 Samuel chapter 17, where you see the context of David and Goliath. Now, in the text, if you read, a Philistine, a champion named Goliath, an heavily armed warrior, was challenging the entire Israelite and their army. Israelites were dismayed and greatly afraid because this man stood in the valley for almost 40 days and he was challenging the entire Israelite community. This was a routine scenario for 40 days that the entire army was witnessing. The army, there was well-trained men, well-armed warriors, skilled professionals, but none of them were ready to face this armed champion named Goliath. But as a young man, a young shepherd boy, he was who was not at all aware of a war, who was not at all skilled, who never have gone for a fight. He said, I will go and fight with the Philistine. Who is that man who defiles the name of God? I will go and fight against the Philistine. And if you look at the text of chapter 17, 1 Samuel, from verse 38, we can read that Saul, the king, clothed this young shepherd boy with armor, and David strapped his sword, and he tried to walk, but it was in vain. He couldn't walk because he couldn't bear the weight of all this armor, and also he was not skilled with all these things, and he was not trained with all these armories and weapon, and he couldn't bear the weight of the armory, and he fell down, and all his attempt was in vain. But if you look at verse 50 and 51 of 1 Samuel chapter 17, you can see that it is written, but David prevailed on him with a sling and a stone. And carefully if you read, you can understand that it is written, David did not have a sword in his hand. So he ran, he took the sword of the Philistine, and he slain the Philistine with the sword of the Philistine itself. The same David who failed in handling a sword that Saul gave him had the power to handle a much bigger weapon a Philistine was using. He took that weapon and he slain it. Now, from where David got this strength? Once he failed with the sword that Saul gave, but now he is successful in handling the sword that a Philistine was having. From where did David get this power to do or succeed in his task? Always we have to remember that victory in the life does not come from our strength. It does not come from our talents. It does not come from our status. It doesn't come from our wealth, or it doesn't come from our skills and our professions we have. Rather, success comes from the presence of God that flows through your weakness. Success comes through the presence of God that flows through your weakness. Presence of God can change any of your weaknesses. Presence of God can change any of your limitations into victory. And it is through the presence of God that flows through your weakness a Christian can lead a successful life. God once told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So the second mantra for the success of life is the presence of God that flows through your weakness. The presence of God that flows through your weakness is the second mantra for the success of the life. And one more incident that I would like to bring to your attention is from Numbers chapter 13, chapter 13 and 14, where we can see that Moses selects spies and he is sending them to look or spy the land of Canaan, where there were people who went to spy the land of Canaan. After 40 days, when they came back carrying the report from the land of Canaan, they had a lot of good things to talk about the promised land, the Canaan, the beauty of the land. They all were fascinated by the beauty of the Canaan, but they were so much discouraged and afraid. And other than Joshua and Caleb, all other people who went as spies, they brought a discouraging message to the entire Israelite community. They said, it is not possible for us to conquer it. It is not possible for us to succeed in this mission. But Joshua and Caleb, if you read Numbers chapter 14 verse 7, they stood in the midst of congregation. Verse 7 says like that, and they said to the whole congregation of Israel, the land we passed through and explored is an exceedingly good land. The Lord, and if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us to this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give us this land. And Joshua and Caleb puts a particular phrase in this text, if the Lord delights in us. If the Lord delights in us, he will give us the land that he has promised. So the third mantra for the success of life is the presence of God that delights in us. If the presence of God is delighted in us, if it is delighted to travel with us, if the presence of God is happy to travel with us, no matter whatever may be our circumstances, the presence of God will take us through, and He will take us safe through our journeys, and He will lead us to the path of success. So the third mantra of success in our life is the presence of God that delights in us. David, when he writes Psalms number 23, he says that even if I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. David, one thing which he was so sure in his life was the presence of God is delighted with him, to travel with him even if he is walking through the valley of shadow of death. He made sure that whatever track, whatever way through which he is traveling, he made sure that presence of God is delighted to travel with him. He was not drifted away in the ways, or he was not traveling in the ways where presence of God cannot travel with him, where presence of God is not delighted or happy to travel with him. So the third mantra of success is the presence of God that is delighted to travel with us in all our ways we are traveling. As you are hearing my voice, if you feel you have tried and failed in your past, once again go back to the places you have failed. Try it with God. Restart, reinitiate, and re-begin your life journey with God. I will assure one thing: the presence of God can change anything. It can turn your failures to success. It can take you back to the places where you felt ashamed, where you felt you were mocked, and can make you feel honored and proud. It can change your weaknesses and limitations and make you a successful one. I am leaving you with a small word. Remember, look unto the God, the promiser. Rely on His presence. He will give you rest, and you will rest peacefully. May God bless us with these words.